Welcome to the first minute of the first episode of The Last Sip, a new weekly news program where we'll spotlight the people and places that are making social change from the ground up. We created The Last Sip with a straightforward belief that the answers to our most pressing problems lie within historically marginalized communities that are Black and brown, women-centered, and LGBTQIA. We'll bring you new faces and ideas to create a conversation about what comes next. The Last Sip is a show for anyone who wants to think differently. So many of you are working to build a better future, and we want to be a news source that's worthy of your efforts, hopes, dreams, and aspirations. Each week, we will be using global and national news developments as an excuse to talk about what we collectively believe our future ought to look like. The bottom line is that we know that a better world is possible, that knowledge and information are the key to making it happen. We'll be sure to keep that at the center of what we do. But we're going to spice it up with a little ratchetness, sexiness, and a whole lot of tea. And there's one other thing. The idea of a news program hosted by a trans woman of color might be uncomfortable to some, but they'll get used to it. There's a whole lot more changes in the world to come. On to our big 3 sips of the week. First up is Paul Ryan's announcement that he will end his speakership at the end of the year. We'll do so with former Obama aide Jesse Moore. Tuesday is tax day, and child, I gotta leave this program and deal with mine, but that's the truth. But the tax code itself reinforces longstanding inequities, especially racial ones. We'll be talking to racial wealth gap expert Alexandra Bastian of the think tank Policy Link about this. And we'll continue this conversation with the leadership of Damayan, an organization here in New York City which is modeling ways to overcome these economic barriers through work with the most marginalized of the marginalized, namely trafficked workers. Our third sip will be a conversation about the 1-month anniversary of the assassination of Brazilian counselor Marielle Franco with Glenn Greenwald of The Intercept, who will be joining us from Brazil, and Professor Erica Williams of Spelman College. And we'll end our program with my special blend of shade in our hot tea segment. On to Speaker Ryan's resignation. After nearly 2 decades in Congress, Paul Ryan, the 3rd highest constitutional officer in the country, is calling it quits, saying that he wants to spend more time with his family. Is he just now noticing them? Paul Ryan rose to power in Congress by advocating drastic cuts to economic opportunity programs. Here to talk to me about Paul Ryan's legacy is Jesse Moore, former aide to President Obama and founder and principal at Common Thread Strategies. It clearly seems that what is the biggest political story this week is the resignation of Paul Ryan. What was your first thought about that when you heard it and when Paul Ryan resigned?
Well, I think the first reaction was the obvious one that's getting a lot of play, which is that this speaks to the wind that's at the back of Democrats coming up this fall. And I think that is true. But I also see it as kind of the continuing death rattle of a party that is kind of dying before our eyes. And it is a scary place for anyone who's trying to be a rational, functional legislature from that side.
Mm-hmm. What do you think his legacy is going to be, especially for communities of color and just marginalized people in general? He had a huge role in helping to set up the undermining of a lot of the social programs and economic opportunity programs. And so what do you think is his legacy now with this tax cut, and what do you think is going to come next?
Well, I think there are 2 main pillars to his legacy, and they both make me sad. One being this tax cut, this massive tax cut, which will just press apart segments of our society in terms of wage gaps, access to health care, everything that's disproportionately affecting Black, brown people, LGBTQI populations, everyone who's disproportionately affected by less access to the resources that we need to be healthy and to be successful. So the tax plan is a catastrophe, and we're going to see that over time. Especially, this is a story we've seen before. They try to sell us trickle-down economics in a new cereal box every couple of years, and we see what happens every single time. The disparity gets worse, and things get worse for people in the margins. The second pillar to his legacy is really shameful, and I don't claim to know Paul Ryan, and I don't know what's in his heart, but he has been a troubling enabler of a president who is dead set on um, benefiting from hate between American people.
Well, that's quite a legacy, and he'll have a lot of time to think about it now that he's going into retirement.
Right.
Thank you so much for joining us today and for coming on. For more information about what we spoke about on Paul Ryan, please go to thelastSIP.org and you can click on how to help. There'll also be more information on Jesse there. So we thank Jesse again for coming on.
Congratulations.
Thank you. We'll be right back. Welcome back. Tax day is April 17th, and more than 65 million Americans will pay nearly $2 trillion in taxes. But what many don't consider is the way in which the tax code reinforces racial inequality in this country. The tax code is an important contributor to the fact that Black and Latino wealth are the lowest on record. Wealth is important because it is the primary measure of economic well-being. Here to discuss this with me is Alexandra Bastian of PolicyLink, who is joining us from activism's hottest spot, the Equity Summit, which is wrapping up in Chicago as we speak. Alexandra, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Amara, and thank you everyone for including PolicyLink in this conversation.
Well, of course, there's no conversation about the racial wealth gap that can't include PolicyLink. So, PolicyLink actually has a primer for advocates, for people who care about the racial wealth gap, called Building an Equitable Tax Code, which lays out the ways in which tax laws, including the one passed last year, drive racial inequality. How so? How does it do that?
The main thing that our current tax structure does is it subsidizes the wealthy at astronomical rates while leaving low-income folks to continue fending for themselves. Many people do not realize that the way that our tax code is structured, the money that goes back to you in terms of credits and deductions, low-income folks tend to not benefit from those. So the majority of that is going to those who are already wealthy. The top 1% claim more benefits from our tax code than the bottom 80% combined. So we're talking about a lot of money, and a lot of money going to folks who ultimately do not need it.
If you earn money off of investments, off of stocks, you're taxed at almost half the rate as you would be if you earned that in income.
You know, there's a big difference in what someone who's benefiting from capital gains. So if you invest in the stock market, which is something that a lot of low-income folks do not have this disposable income to do, you pay a lower tax rate on the money coming to you from that income than you would if you actually went to work every day and earned a paycheck. So it's a constant reinforcing of the wealth disparity.
And one other thing is that wealth primarily, even outside of stocks and bonds, is primarily held by people who own houses. But as we know, there have been these historical barriers to people of color owning houses in this country.
There are so many factors that contribute to what we call the growing racial wealth gap. A white household has 13 times the wealth of a African American household. It has 10 times the wealth of a Latino household. And one of the large ways in which this happens is that we have all of these institutions and structures like our tax code that contribute to that. So not only do low-income folks and people of color, not only do they not itemize their deductions, it's not simply a matter of choice, they probably only qualify for the standard deduction. And so even if you have a house and you're a person of color, if you're an African American, that house that you own might be valued at less. So there's many pieces that play into that, and they all have a historical context, all of them with deep racial tension and racial exclusion. And that's why it plays such a large role in how people of color are able to benefit from even something that seems like it's available to everyone, like the mortgage interest deduction.
Right. We're actually going to be talking to a workers collective in a little bit who, Damayan, who they have an innovative way through work cooperatives to have employees actually own their own wealth and labor as a way to remedy that. So the good news is that there are solutions out there. We want to thank you for joining us today. Thank you for Policy Link. Thank you for the Equity Summit. And for more information about Policy Link, the racial wealth gap, and some of the possible solutions, please go to thelastsip.org and click on How to Help. We will be able to show you there how to help. What are some of the alternative models for wealth creation, especially amongst marginalized people? One model that is being piloted by a program here in New York amongst the most marginalized of the marginalized, namely trafficked workers, is allowing them to create the wealth that they earn through cooperatives. Here to talk about that is Linda Olcan, Executive Director of Damayan, and Lydia Cantina Amaya, board member of the Damayan Workers Cooperative and a trafficking survivor herself. So thank you all for joining us. Linda, tell us what helps sort of explain the work of Damayan, why Damayan is important, and why you exist before we talk a little bit about cooperatives.
Damayan means helping each other. We self-organize to help ourselves to address the different issues that are challenging our community. You see, Damayan is composed of Filipino domestic workers and other low-wage workers. Many of us in this industry fall into trafficking. That's what happened to Lydia. So this work, domestic work, just like farm workers, domestic workers like farm workers are excluded from major federal labor laws. We have no basic protection, right? And we are in the intersections of different systems of oppression, like racism. You, I think, is very familiar with that. And so with us, you know, as women of color who came here and work, you know, in the isolated private homes of our employers, we see that.
Why is worker cooperatives a solution for people who have been brought to the United States in trafficking or come to the United States and trafficked under these circumstances? And why a cooperative? Why is a cooperative an idea that you all have begun to experiment?
So the cooperative is meant to the survivor, just like me and other family who came to the United States. And the family came to the United States because when you have a visa approved from the T visa, and then you can sponsor your family, your children and your husband to came to reunited with you. In that situations, you are earning like $1.
What happens when people are taken out of traffic situations where they've been brought to the United States with their will, but under circumstances that weren't true, have their documents taken away from them, and then end up working in de facto bondage in families? Yes. Once you're able to get out of that situation, what happens is that you need work, right? And you need to have, your family comes to the United States, and you need to have work. You need to have the ability to be able to provide for them. And so one of the answers that you all came up with is a cooperative where you were explaining, because the workers are able to actually own their labor, right, that you're able to pay them more, that they have better better benefits, that there's an upside to kind of owning your own labor, which is what the cooperative is, right?
Again, I will give myself as an example. Escaping in that situation, you will keep going back in the same situation because you don't know your rights. You don't have a reference letter in order for you to find a good job. So we just take the under minimum wage, long hours, and then when you don't have something like you don't have the power to negotiate with your employer. So it's that. Yeah, you're being exploited again, over and over again. So I think this cooperative is a way for us, regardless for our status, is meant for all the survivors and all our members looking for a job who are undocumented can be able to join this cooperative. So we formed this cooperative and last year, it was way back in 2016, we became LLC in July. And then as you mentioned, we are still a little, but we are like, we are slowly, but we make sure that we are on the right track. Because this is not only a job in order for us to support our needs and be like, it's like a decent job. And as I mentioned before, like in our interview, like $15 for an hour additional for that the metro round trip metro card, and also as we go moving along, we will be able to like have the benefits that Linda mentioned. We are excluded from the very basic benefits. So this cooperative is the owner, and we are the owner and the workers of this cooperative. So we decide for this how much work we will put and how much money we will share to us another. And also, we want to support the organizing. This is the social enterprise. This is very new. It's a social enterprise cooperative.
Right.
Yes.
Well, thank you all for joining us and for the work that you do, for giving us a little bit of perspective about trafficking itself and about the cooperative. The good news is that people will be able to actually go to our website to get more information about you and about worker cooperatives as an alternative. So thank you all for joining us. And like I said, make sure that you go to thelastSIP.org, where you can please click on how to help on our page, and that will take you to a lot more information about Damayan and about worker cooperatives in general as an option for all of us. Thanks again.
Thank you very much.
Welcome back to The Last Sip. It's been 1 month since the killing of Brazilian councilor Marielle Franco. Her murder is widely believed to be a politically driven assassination of a woman of color working to change her community from the ground up. Here to talk about the latest in her case and why it's important to the world is Glenn Greenwald, co-founder of The Intercept, and Erica Williams, associate professor of anthropology at Spelman College and incoming chair of the sociology and anthropology department there. Glenn, bem-vindo para vocês dois. Glenn, you're joining us from Rio, and Marielle was your friend. Just first off, can you tell us what she was like and why she was so special?
She was special on every level. Obviously, politically, she was an extraordinarily important figure for the city because there hadn't been a black woman on the Rio City Council in 10 years, even though the city is more than 50% black. She came from one of the most deprived favelas in the city, in Maré. And black women from favelas don't often come into positions of prominence and significance. And at the same time, she was LGBT and an outspoken feminist. So this combination made her unbelievably unique just in and of itself, let alone the force with which she advocated for the traditionally voiceless in this country, the bravery she displayed in standing up to the most powerful factions. But then there was this personal side of her that those of us who were lucky enough to be friends with her were able to see. There are a lot of politically prominent people I know whose politics are really good in the abstract and it doesn't quite translate into their personal conduct. Marielle was exactly the opposite. As strong and brave and principled as she was as a public figure, was how compassionate and kind and generous she was in her personal life, not to powerful people, but to everybody. And I guess, you know, the thing that I remember the most about Marielle, my husband, David Miranda, who served on the city council with her and was her best friend, or certainly one of her best friends, gave a speech the day after she was killed. And he talked about how whenever Marielle was in the room, all eyes were on her. There was just no forgetting or ignoring or neglecting Marielle, not because she did anything to call attention to herself, but just because she was just such a singularly charismatic, confident, and powerful woman.
So What's the latest on her case in terms of the investigation and where things stand in that regard?
Well, it's all a little bit unclear because the assassination, and that's what it was a political assassination of Marielle, took place very early on in the military intervention of Rio de Janeiro, the first time since the military dictatorship in 1985 ended that the military was deployed here. So ironically, it happened right under the noses of the military deployed here to secure the safety of the city and its residents. It's the primary focus of the investigation are on what's called the militias, which are kind of like mafia organized crime rings, but they're linked to the police and they're linked to the military. The execution was carried out with extreme levels of professionalism and skill and competence. Whoever did it knew exactly how the police investigate murders. And amazingly, there are 51 members of the city council, and at least 5 to 7 of them have been identified by an investigation in which Marielle participated, in which her party led, that identified them as leading members of these militias, several of whom she had personally confronted in a very kind of direct way. And they seem to be the leading suspects.
Wow. Erica, recently you and a group of other Black women academics wrote an open letter to Folha de Sao Paulo, which is Brazil's largest newspaper, to highlight the importance of her life and death. Why do you think that she's important to women of color in the United States? And generally, what's her significance within the Brazilian context of Blackness?
Originally, the open letter that we wrote is called On the Imperative of Transnational Solidarity, a U.S. Black feminist statement on the assassination of Marielle Franco. It originally started with us kind of being in conversation on Twitter about the the assassination of Marielle Franco. And as Black women who have been doing research in Brazil for, at least 10 to 20 years, we were very much struck by as you said, Glenn said, the brazenness of this case. So unfortunately, my work has been based in Salvador and Bahia in the northeast of Brazil. So I didn't have the opportunity to meet Marielle Franco. And I was made aware when Keisha Perry tweeted about her assassination, and immediately I started digging in, learning more about her. And the more I read about her, she just struck me as so many women that I've known and gotten a chance to meet in Bahia. She symbolized and she just kind of represented so much of what we have been struggling for, both in Brazil and in the U.S.
Well, thank you both for joining us. To give us an update on where things stand. We're going to keep following this. This isn't going to go away, or at least we're not going to let it go, and we're going to continue to delve into this. And you can also listen to more of this interview in our web extra, so please make sure that you go to our website, thelastSIP.org, to see more of that. We'll be right back. Hello, welcome back to The Last Sip. It's been a big week for women in music. Cardi B came out with a new album, co-hosted The Tonight Show with Jimmy Fallon, and announced that she was pregnant. Azealia Banks dropped a new club turn-up called Anna Wintour, and Nicki Minaj staked her ongoing relevance, I guess, by dropping 2 new songs. And Grace Jones, overall fierce woman and avant-garde icon, finally released the documentary on her life. So with that, maybe it's no surprise that the most interesting moves were made by 2 queer women, or at least 2 queer presenting women. The first is Young M.A., who produced an adult film called The Gift. It's about a young woman who, on her birthday, enters into a house, getting and receiving the type of presents you can't return. The Gift is behind the paywall of Pornhub in that site's revamped For Women section. And y'all can't imagine how many people on the Last Sip team spent last night trying to hack their way into that one under the guise of research. But the biggest move was made by actor and singer Janelle Monáe, who released her video Pink, in which she struts around the desert in a pair of vagina pants, reciting lyrics like, "Pink like the tongue that goes down, pink like paradise found." I almost want to say amen after that. Now, this is the hottest tea, because what can be more radical than a woman openly discussing letting her pink parts hang out. Men, of course, as a sign of power, are invited to let their business fall out and be seen by all, while women are taught to hide it, keep it covered, and keep it crossed. Well, not now. Monet is encouraging women, those of us with pink parts, to get real pinky with it, embracing this power. And the entire video is done with women only, for women, by women, without a male gaze. And I'm here for this radical queer vision being put forth by her. But I can tell you one thing, I won't ever be able to look at a bottle of Pepto-Bismol the same. So that's it for The Last Sip. That's the last sip of The Last Sip. And we look forward to seeing you again right here next week. Till then, check us out anytime online. And for The Last Sip, I'm Amara Jones.